Welcome to SHOWstudio's live panel discussions, where experts from across the industry come together to talk about the most important Fashion Week shows of the season. And today we're going to talk about Saint Laurent Autumn-Winter 2024. I'm Nathalie Khan, and I'm course leader for BA Culture Criticism and Curation at Central St. Martin's. And I'm really excited to welcome my amazing panel today. And before we delve into the show and talk all things Saint Laurent, I'd like to ask my amazing panelists to introduce themselves. Who wants to go first?
Hi, I'm Ivana Giachino. I've got my own company where I consult for luxury brands on their overall strategy, from communication to entertainment marketing, talent, and social. And I always advise them on a 360 scope of work. And I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vita Talleyrand-Perigord, and I'm a writer.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Curran. I'm a stylist and founder of The Archive.
Hi, I'm Amy Francombe, and I'm a journalist and the deputy editor of The Basement.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a filmmaker and head of fashion film at SHOWstudio.
Thank you so much. And I think as we can see, we've got an amazing panel today, which has comes from all different fields and areas of interest. So I'm really excited what we can all bring to to this show today. Also, I wanted to say that we are live today. That means that we're going to take questions from the audience towards the end of the panel. So if you want to participate and shoot us any questions, then please do so. Okay, so to begin with, I wanted us to reflect on something really particular that really struck me when I thought about the panel today. I obviously had sort of looked at what journalists are saying about Saint Laurent at the moment, and something that sort of was consistent in the messaging for me was that the team behind the brand, Anthony Vaccarello and Francesco Bellettini, the associate chief executive, have this mission right now. And so it seems to me, protect the brand, protect the brand, protect the brand. Mm-hmm. It's almost like a mantra. And they have a lot of success with that. But I just wanted to get your perspective on it, of what you think that means for you in general, what your thoughts are about this, but also what it means for Saint Laurent.
I'll start.
Yeah.
For me, I think protecting the brand is protecting the legacy of Yves Saint Laurent, and I think for me, this show it really embodies that. I think obviously with the whole show being sheer and Saint Laurent being the person to sort of start or do the first sheer dress in the 60s. I think it's a real ode to the original design, and I think Vaccarello really wanted to continue his legacy and sort of start where he finished. And I think this is a great example of that.
I also think that looking back at the narrative of the brand,
Yes.
from the very beginning to now, I just think that it's the strength and also the kind of power that gives to women. And I feel that that is something that obviously Yves Saint Laurent himself, he was quite provocative from the very early kind of times of Le Smoking and the sheer,
Yes.
when all of a sudden women felt empowered, because at the time gender equality wasn't a thing. And I think that's really what's probably Anthony Vaccarello does best, of not being afraid of giving women that kind of power, which it evolves through sheer, to structures, shapes. And I feel that more than ever this show, I agree with you, has really kind of put its stamp on what Yves Saint Laurent, in fact, is all about.
It's interesting what you're saying about sort of female empowerment. We haven't looked at, the sort of particular looks from the collection yet, but I think maybe coming back to that sort of mythology of the house, and all those associations that we have before we delve into the show. Amy, do you have for Vita, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you sort of brought up the female empowerment thing because, you know, that has been so woven into the brand's history and narrative. But what didn't quite hit for me with this show is obviously sheer dressing has just been such an endless, enduring trend the last 2 years. And obviously it was kickstarted here by this house. And I understand that kind of restamping about that, and you know, there's literally an exhibition all about this called Transparencies that is showing in Paris as we speak, literally down the road until August. Amazing. So I really see that kind of protect the brand, but I don't know if the female empowerment really came through for me. I was reading reviews where people were talking about how when they were backstage, they were saying a lot of these dresses were made of hosiery, literally tight hosiery, and he was saying, do not move, otherwise you might snag it before you go out. And this idea of like really restricting the models and then sending them out with, I don't know, it was beautiful and it's really sexy and it's hot, but I just think it was quite one-dimensional. Like, yes, it was, but I don't know what it really says about the woman wearing it today. Like, I don't know what it says about her relationship to her body or sexual intimacy, whilst when it was, you know, in the 60s, you know, this was right at the height of a sexual revolution where, you know, this traditional ideas of what a woman and the gender roles of femininity were being completely upended. So by having that, it really was a statement. But now I'm like, okay, it just feels like some really beautiful, sexy dresses at a time where, you know, sheer dressing is everywhere. But I don't really get anything more than that. I don't get the empowerment necessarily.
Vita, what are your thoughts?
When it comes to protecting the brand, I think Vaccarello is like secretly one of the most interesting conceptually designer, but under this like glare of glamour that makes it that people don't see that as any form of conceptuality. And I think when it comes to protecting the house, every year, every season, he gives like almost like a retelling of one of the most important codes of the house in a modern way, twisted with something else. You know, like before it was like the little black leotard from Mississippi Mermaid that Saint Laurent did for Catherine Deneuve for the movie. Then, like, you know, there was a whole season where it was all leotards. You had like all the 70s glamour. You had like the whole latex collection was obviously an homage to, once again, Catherine Deneuve in Belle de Jour, like the trench coat she's wearing. It was like it's almost taking one aspect and seeing how far and how beyond we can go within it. And to me, this is Belle de Jour, but the other side of the way she dresses. And I actually think in the color palette, there's some really interesting things we can talk about later. But I think there's something like quite conceptually strong under this, like, you know, this pretense of it just being a beautiful, glamorous 70s show with like the Lulu de la Falaise jewelry and turbans. That's how I see it. So I think it's about creating this house that's a legacy that almost runs for itself. And, you know, it's like every year, it's going to be one of the other code. We're going to exhaust it, go to the end conceptually of what it can be. And next year will be a different one.
Agree, yeah.
Probably like the safari, you know, like it'll be something else from
Well, we had the safari jacket. That was another theme that was worked through, I think, in the last collection, if we have an image of that.
I just mean like a whole collection of that. Do you know what I mean? Something like that.
Talking about this idea of protecting the legacy of the house and really focusing on a silhouette or a particular garment or a theme that runs through, looking at the collection overall, away from this sort of absolutely spectacular setting that we're seeing here, and I want to give that some space as well. But what I'm seeing here when we're looking at the looks is that it's the reworking of one particular idea over and over and over and over again. And I haven't built a collection personally. I don't know really what goes into it. And I don't know if anyone here on this panel is really aware of how you edit a collection and how you put a runway show together. But what I'm noticing here is that repetition is almost something that is sort of forcing us to engage with that particular code of the house, as you say, Vita, again and again. And that I don't see so much. Usually if you see a show, there's variety, there you bring in different looks and ideas, the influences come together. But here there's a true sense of this is what underpins the show. If it's the season, that's a different thing.
I think it's also interesting that it's supposed to be a fall show, you know, autumn, winter, and everything is highly sheer. And I think the coats are actually been held under their arms. So, you know, the practicality is nil. You know, obviously, I'm sure that all those beautiful garments, they're all laddered when they probably, they were, you know, taken off or even put on. But it's just magical. I feel like, you know, that's really the beauty of a show. It's beyond the practicality of it. And I think that that's what Anthony Vaccarello, it almost ignores all that. And I feel that that's his strength in a way.
It's a confidence in that.
Yeah, and I think he's one of the best designers of this idea of fetish. Like every season there's this one fetish that he will go through. Yeah. And like this year it's hosiery, which is like this really, I think it's incredibly smart because you have this like, this whole stocking, which is, I'm pretty sure is a Belle de Jour reference because the whole thing is about how she wears those tiny little Saint Laurent A-line dresses, but underneath she has all this lingerie. Like you can see all the lingerie details. The dresses are obviously like silk hosiery, and you have this like exhaustion of that idea. But also, I think it's so smart because you see it in the accessories. This like those bourgeois accessories, the outside of this woman. You know, it's almost like she's wearing her underwear outside, and you just, it comes out like that little belt, that very 70s bourgeois belt. And all the colors are almost, when we saw earlier the Belle de Jour sets, it's almost the colors of the set, that's kind of like disgusting, well, sorry, disgusting to me. Like, you know, kind of like kind of revolting like beiges and greens and taupe, are not very appealing. And how can you make that insanely sexy? Like I think in some of the images we were seeing earlier, when you see her in the house, in the flat that she's in, you have those like blue walls, the green leather couch, all of that. And once again, the reference with, like you see all those interiors, those types of kind of dowdy colors, and those latex trench coats, which is what she wears also in the movie. So I think it's just the exhaustion of this.
Sam, I wanted to come to you as well as, you know, our sort of film expert here. Do you see the parallel here? And I love what you're saying, Vita, about sort of the color board and how that feeds into the collection. But that sort of difference between costume and film, I think, would be an interesting thing. Because for those who don't know, perhaps, Yves Saint Laurent designed the costumes for Catherine Deneuve in Belle de Jour.
Yeah, I think personally, there are like fundamental differences to fashion and costume. They do serve, they can exist together, but they do serve like different purposes. Fashion can challenge you, obviously, but it is fundamentally aspirational, whereas in a film, it isn't necessarily aspirational. In fact, the narrative can be completely abhorrent. It can completely oppose you as an individual. I think in Belle de Jour, though, it clearly works very well, and the show that we saw last night massively references it. Yeah.
Very interesting. And I think also that sort of difference between costume and fashion, I think if you watch a film and you notice the costumes, they're not very good, right?
Well, it doesn't.
They have to sort of blend in and become part of the character, but they're not the main thing. Whereas in fashion, it's the center of everything.
They are fundamentally an extension of the character.
Yes.
I think, because obviously fashion and clothes are something that define us. They're part of our personalities. I just immediately thought of Poor Things recently. You know, the costume in that is so noticeable, and I think it works perfectly well. It's almost acknowledges that it can be confronting.
Yeah. And take on its sort of supernatural sort of quality as well. And yes, in Poor Things, that the costumes play a very different part in that. And we were talking about fashion and film. There are a couple of things I think that also really strike me going back to the show. And for me, thinking about the way that Saint Laurent represents itself right now to the audience through the shows appears really cinematic. And I just wanted for us to take a bit of time for sort of thinking of what that means, apart from Saint Laurent's engagement within the film industry, I just wanted to focus really about sort of the staging and what cinematic means in the context of the fashion show alone. Cinematic is something that is not just about film. TV can be cinematic, fashion can be cinematic, fashion images can be cinematic. It elevates what is represented to something much bigger than itself. And I think there's something at play here that is achieved, again, to protect the house, to protect the brand, but what do we feel here is sort of cinematic about what we're seeing?
Well, I worked in production a long time ago, but one thing that strikes me always with their show, they look like a film set, and from obviously the Tour Eiffel a couple of seasons ago to this one being like basically a film set, a studio, where everything is just so kind of like giant and big, but also quite. I want to say unemotional, quite clinical, do you know what I mean? So that it's just so aesthetically kind of like on par with the image of Saint Laurent, and I feel like, I think that it's so beautiful because it's almost like it doesn't interfere with the clothes in a way, and the clothes really stand out in such a beautiful way that it's for the audience. It's really easy to process it and view it.
I think a sense of cinema is such an elusive thing as well. Like, what does that actually fucking mean? Like, what is cinematic? Is it the costume, or is it the lighting, or like what actually is it? And
well, it's a combination of all of those things.
It's a combination. It's a bit like alchemy in a way. But in this instance, you can see them playing quite clearly with shadow and light. There's a few angles here. I don't know if we can skim through. And it's kind of wide angle looking down like this. You can barely see, the features, but it's nice because it shows you this different perspective of maybe silhouette or something.
Yeah, almost
like
looks like a rainy pavement or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like a movie.
Yeah.
It's like you can't quite sort of know when it is set. It could be the future. It's something very nostalgic. It could be the past. It's sort of timeless in that sense. Sorry.
The sound, the space that you were mentioning earlier, it does look like a sound stage, or a lair. Something like that. It's it's really overwhelming, and it gives you that sense of when you'd see a super widescreen film 70mm being projected, you feel like you're there.
For me, I think actually there's like a real literal cinema feel to it, with the curtains and the audience in the shadows. It is almost like looking out from the screen into the cinema of people watching, something like it's the people watching a movie the same way they're watching the show.
And I think all of that, once again, if the motto of the brand currently is about establishing this like legacy that kind of trucks on by itself almost. I think what Vaccarello is so good at doing is like, it's about the fantasy of what Yves Saint Laurent is. It actually doesn't really matter. No one's really going to go back and check a few of the very questionable 80s collections. Or what matters is what is your idea of what Saint Laurent? Every season he's like, oh, do you remember it's the sheerness? Do you remember it's this? And it's associating also with Yves Saint Laurent's cinematic work. Is a way of making sure that it exists outside of it, because it's a brand that doesn't sell clothes. Yves Saint Laurent doesn't sell clothes. They sell perfume, they sell cosmetics, they sell a few handbags, but no one's buying the clothes. So the clothes are just here to create this element of, I don't know if someone can prove me wrong, but I don't think, do you know what I mean? I don't think that's the concern of the brand. That's what they mean by protecting it. It's about creating this legacy. What is the Saint Laurent fantasy?
Yeah.
Every season we're having an aspect of it.
For sure. Sorry.
You go.
Just touching on that, I think, this show feels, not commercial in the slightest, and I think that is one thing that I feel Vaccarello is not super interested in. And that's really admirable, you know, like he's not really thought of the commercial aspect of it, and I think it's really apparent here.
I've got some figures on it, just not that I'm correcting you, Vita, just like quickly interjecting here. In 2023, Yves Saint Laurent's revenue amounted to 3.2 billion, down 4% as reported and down 1% on a comparable basis. So sales from the directly operated retail network rose by 4%. So yeah, I think across the board, I think
they make a lot of money. I was just saying what they make their money in is probably shoes, handbags, perfume, cosmetics.
Yeah.
I just don't think they necessarily sell clothes. I mean, who would wear that?
I mean, half of it isn't even going to production.
Yeah.
He was like,
That's
don't
what I
ask
mean.
me, it's just about, as you said, the fantasy of that sheerness and really pushing it and, as you said, exasperating what it could be, rather than it being like what you'll see on red carpets or the streets or anything, really.
But when I say that as a positive. Like, it sounds like it's a negative thing, but I think they know their strength. They know that, like, this is not necessarily what we're concerned with. If it's not necessarily what we're concerned with, might as well, once again, exhaust this conceptual idea of this time, what is hosiery and fur and, like, all those. I think it's so smart as well that's, like, this really, like, fetishistic, like, hypersexual idea of, like, furs and satins and stockings, like all the trappings of like a very classic sexual fetish of femininity, but with, like, the Lulu de Fez turban that's a bit unflattering, that's a bit, like, if anything, man repelling, you know. I think there's something quite, like, in that contrast that I think is gorgeous.
I haven't had that man repelling for a while. I miss it, actually.
I know.
I also think that I thought there was something quite interesting. Anthony Vaccarello said after the show that he was sort of kind of saying that, you know, I think that somebody questioned him about how much of, you know, this collection is going to go into production. And he actually was like, it doesn't matter because you'll find something that you want to buy it. But I feel that, you know, it's almost like a fashion show nowadays. It's almost your, like, ad campaign. It really, that's really, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think it's actually quite brave that one thing they say is, I just want people to love it, to hate it, nothing in the middle. And I think everybody's playing so safe, which is, I actually think that doing something so provocative, it's quite refreshing when everything else so far has been quite samey in a way. And it's good. It's actually good because, look, we're all talking about it, you know?
I mean, looking at the images now, also, I wanted to ask you about what we think, how the audience is placed within that space. And I think someone commented on that already. It is a bit like a film audience. They're in the shadows, right? They're sort of hidden. It's just a couple of front rows. It doesn't seem crowded, although the space seems big as well. What is that sense of, is the show playing to the audience? Are they participating? I don't think that anyone is particularly, you know, nobody's able to see the front row because it's just shadows, so that we're looking at. In my mind, and I don't know what you guys think, in my mind that seems like the epitome of exclusivity. You know, we're so confident, we don't need to show you the A-list audience.
But maybe it's also the acknowledgement that the broadcast or cinema is the priority here. Because to me, the audience almost look like extras to the show.
Go on.
I was just going to say, I think like Vaccarello's not really interested in, you know, influencers, TikTokers. You know, and Saint Laurent have this sort of core group of celebrities or people that he wants to be wearing the clothes, and you know, he really gets to know these people, and it's more like a family. You know, he's not looking to just have the next you know, the next big star on the front row.
And none of it feels like stunts as well.
Yeah,
you know
it's
what I mean?
not gimmicky.
It's not like like very particular faces walking the runway or.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was about the set. I was looking in the show notes. I think it's quite funny because they mention how the drapery is meant to evoke the couture salon of, like, Avenue Marceau, so like, you know, the original, like the way couture was shown, whatever, which was famously very cramped. You know, like, and Balenciaga, for example, has played on that, on the fact that, like, you're literally, you know, people can touch the fabric or whatever. And I think it's funny that they mentioned, like, oh, we're doing a riff on this, but it's the most, like, you know, like, distance that you could ever imagine on a fashion show. I think it's quite funny. But, yeah.
Amy, you report on fashion, and I wanted to come back to you as well to sort of tell us a little bit more about the sort of the experience of being at a show.
Yeah, I think that what is interesting about what you said, there being no sort of spectacle or gimmick to it. Like, I think that, you know, last season, the big kind of thing was just having the biggest celebrity you could possibly have on the runway, and that's kind of how they drew the clicks. Because obviously, for a runway, it's all about how much attention can we get on it, what buzz can we build, what are those viral moments. And obviously, I'm not saying that it's Vaccarello that's charging that, but there is these whole teams around it that know these are very expensive things to put on, and what is that metric that we're judging the success by. And I think it's interesting because, you know, we have really seen such a rise of either a spectacle, whether it's, I don't know, the Copernicus very printed dress, or this huge celebrity that's interacting, or celebrity wearing a dress that's about to come on the runway. I think it's really interesting that with this one, it has been really subdued compared to what has been that really traditional fashion show experience as of late. It's really just kind of a focus on these clothes that does have that kind of provocative edge, because obviously there are just so many nipples, but it's not done in a way that's meant to be salacious or anything. It's not meant to be, you know, like purposefully to annoy people. It feels like quite beautifully done. So yeah, that's what I thought was quite interesting about this. It felt very confident.
You know, going to that point, I actually thought that was quite interesting on their front row, because what I noticed, on the contrary, that was Olivia Wild, for example, that was at the show. She was actually wearing something so sheer that I actually thought, with the obviously censored, like, social media that we're living, I thought that from Zoe Kravitz to Olivia Wild and to the many others, celebrities that were there, which they do get photographed as they enter, because we don't see them there, right? I thought that the sheer was sort of like very obvious, you know, from the moment that they arrived, in more obvious and more subtle ways. But I actually thought they're strong women, and actually women that they are not afraid. And I felt like from Zoe Kravitz, obviously, which is face of brand, to even Dua Lipa, that she's face of brand for obviously like perfume. You know, perfume. So I just thought, I mean, Olivia there is like gorgeous, love her. You know, I just think that was like kind of a bit of a sneak peek before we watched the show, her arriving in a very, very sheer like top. You know.
Yeah, and it's so funny because if you Google, that's the main thing that will come up. Like that's the headline that the Daily Mails have run with. It's like Olivia Wild bears all. So that I guess you're so right. There is that kind of element that it feels like that's more a commentary on the publication than it is the designer, because it's like, why have you decided that's a headline worthy event? Because it's not. It's just a pair of nipples. Like it's not that deep.
Absolutely.
But you know, and the whole collection is there to the point that I get quite. I'm so desensitized. Like I just don't. I just think it's literally just a piece of skin at this point, which it should be viewed as. But it's interesting then that that's kind of what is the runaway, and I guess it is also expected. And I think if you look at some of the Instagram comments, people are like, "Oh, this is really misogynistic," and that is always to be expected. But I think it's such a reductive thing that it wasn't purposefully done for that reaction.
Yeah. I think we get all those kind of reactions though nowadays. Every single celebrity that worked their carpet with something sheer, sadly, from, you know, Florence Pugh and Valentino to others, you know, it just seems to be coming back, and it's actually quite dull, you know, in that sense, in certain type of outlets and media, obviously.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I love that. Now, we mentioned Olivia Wild, who is a film director, and I think it's no coincidence that Anthony Vaccarello surrounds himself with people from the film industry and many influential directors. A little bit of news, I think, in terms of wider context beyond the show, is that the house has started a production company last year, set up a production company in Paris, and is working with some of the sort of, best known auteurs currently working in the film industry. This is not new for fashion houses. Prada has been doing this for a number of years, but I feel that for Saint Laurent taking this step, that is taking on quite a lot of the heavy lifting of filmmaking. And the first film that was premiered at the Cannes Film Festival last year was by Almodóvar. And I think we have a film poster here somewhere that would be nice to show.
This is the trailer.
That's the trailer from the film. This is a Western, and it's sort of a gay love story. The costumes are by Anthony Vaccarello. But again, when we talked about costume and Belle de Jour and Catherine Deneuve, this is obviously not the 70s we are now. This is a contemporary take on a story, and then fashion then becomes almost a character in these films. And it's a power move. It's incredibly impressive. These are films on the global stage produced by Saint Laurent. I think we have to comment on it. I mean, it would be crazy not to reflect on this. Sam, do you want to give us your thoughts on this?
It is definitely impressive, and part of me does love the fact they're doing this. I think Vaccarello is doing it probably for one reason. Well, he outwardly said this in an article about how film has a stronger cultural legacy than a fashion show. You can watch a film from the 50s, 60s today, and it still feels somewhat relevant. So I think they're very aware of this, and when we're talking about protecting the brand and legacy, it's definitely why they're entering this market. I would note, though, that it does feel a bit nostalgic to me. You know, the directors listed on there, they're all men. One of them's dead. You know, it doesn't feel like they're looking at younger talent or newer filmmakers. They're directors, which I think is a real shame and really makes me feel like they're more interested in cementing themselves in history rather than they are the future.
But they're also putting people who famously have said that they would either retire from cinema because they couldn't find people who could. They're still like targeting auteur like directors. I know like it could be more diverse, and it clearly is like, you know, a way of sedimenting yourself with something from the past, but it is a brand from the past.
Totally.
But I think it's quite interesting that they're managed to poach those directors who have famously said, I wouldn't be able to make a movie how I want to make one now with how production companies are. So if they can, I don't know, for all the evil of a company like Kering, if they can help with like something, you know, like creating some beauty in that way, I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, I think it was Derek Blasberg that was interviewing Anthony Vaccarello, and he said about, you know, collaborating with artists. It wasn't. It was more about like allowing the artists, or I guess in this instance the directors, this space to do what they want, you know, a platform, and I guess that's what's happened.
I do wonder about it though, because if you go to the Almodóvar film, you know, it hasn't had the same critical reception as previous films, and actually some people have even come out and said it feels like an extension of an advert.
Interesting.
Which, I mean, is probably one of the worst things you can hear as a director. And it goes back to this idea that, you know, it's very unlikely any character in a film is going to open their wardrobe and it's all Saint Laurent. No, it's an eclectic mix of different things that make us.
I mean, designers have always dressed people in,
Oh, totally.
in films.
And
Like
we've
not
seen-
just with Saint Laurent, but like I know,
Yeah,
like it's
I mean,
quite
the biggest
big.
splash
Yeah.
was Dior, and it was
Yes.
amazing.
Karl Lagerfeld did a lot of
Armani,
Chabrol.
American Gigolo, right?
Yeah.
Karl Lagerfeld did a lot of Chabrol movies. Miuccia Prada has done a lot of costumes. Like it's
Yeah.
not.
It
It
does
doesn't mean that
work,
because
for
they
sure.
make it that it needs to be an advert for the brand.
Yeah.
That's the one thing.
I think it just presents a limitation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's still very early days. They haven't got many examples yet of the work, so it'll be interesting to see what comes, I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to also have a quick look at the campaign that runs parallel to this really interesting development. So here we have David Cronenberg. This is an advert for Saint Laurent. It's shot by David Sims. There are some others. We have Almodóvar as well. Here he is, looking good. Jean-Luc.
I mean, I think they're excellent, but I feel like to me they look very samey to many other campaigns. I think that if there was one thing that I feel like that is actually quite probably the one thing that doesn't. I don't have really an opinion, because this kind of campaign you see over and over in Celine, in many others, luxury brands. So I don't think it's anything revolutionary, in my opinion. I feel actually it's quite unusual for a Saint Laurent, I have to say, because everything else, it's very on brand. But this campaigns with like those kind of directors, I feel like we've seen it, and sometimes I'm like, oh wait, if you take away the Saint Laurent logo, it could be maybe Celine or maybe somebody else. I don't actually think that that's very innovative, if I were to say.
Yeah, I think they could have done without that.
Right.
And just made it about the films themselves.
Totally.
It is reversing and turning the camera onto the filmmaker, which I think is, as a move, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
So that changing the lens and just like
Prada
putting
does
them
it. They've been doing it for so many years, and they do it in a really brilliant way. I think that it's good, but not really original, in a way.
I think this idea of fashion being original, I think, is also an interesting thing just to put out there, because would we expect Saint Laurent to be original? Just asking the panel, would we expect Saint Laurent to be original?
I think it's not the point of a brand like that anymore. Like I think they just want to sediment the fact that they are, this luxury giant that is known for something, is known for a few hallmarks, and that's what's going to make them last as well. I think that's where Vaccarello is also so smart, is that every time it's like, as like we said earlier, like, oh, this is one of the codes, you know it, but like this time we're going to go all the way. And he is one of those designers that I think doesn't get enough credit, because he's very glamorous, but not flashy in the term of like, oh, I'm going to do this big stunt, or I'm going to do, but he does this one thing really well, which is he makes incredibly beautiful, sexy clothes that look very expensive. And he does it every time. If that's what you're in the market for, that's who you go to. And I think there's a strength in that, like cornering your own little market. I was just rethinking of this like Tom Ford interview, a few months ago, where he was talking about that, like how one of the greatest strengths of a designer is not to be able to do it all, but to do one thing very, very well. And I think that's what Vaccarello is proving.
I agree.
But it definitely feels contemporary,
Yeah.
like it is, there's references to the past, and maybe it's not completely original, but it's, there's a twist, it's a retake, it's contemporary, I think. 2.0.
We are now at a point where I'm also opening to audience questions. So do we have any questions that we want the panel to respond to?
Which female director would you love to see Saint Laurent Productions work with?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, whoever posted that. What do we think? Which female director?
Well, probably Greta Gerwig is like one of the best female directors, or that is of now. Just purely because of her recent success. But there are so many globally that it's probably quite hard to pin it. But I feel like she'll probably be one that wouldn't be afraid to push the boundaries, probably. In that sense.
Yeah. I feel like Sofia Coppola
Yeah,
is
that would be my pick.
you know, just really aligned, I think, with Saint Laurent. So yeah.
I would like to see Lynn Ramsey, someone with a really raw aesthetic, whose fiction but verges on, it feels almost like documentary when you're watching it.
I have also an answer, but it's not a woman. But my dream, because I love this project just because if anyone can bring Wong Kar Wai out of retirement, I think they deserve, the world. And he's one of the 3 men I talk about every day. The other 2 being also 2 directors. One of them who I think wouldn't do it, but I think it would be a beautiful thing if they produced a Tom Ford movie with his history with the brand,
Yeah.
Because that show was also very referential of the Tom Ford era at Saint Laurent, which at the time he was trying to do that thing of creating this legacy and kind of taking away Eve from the Saint Laurent thing. He just wasn't able to do it because Eve was still alive. But I think Vaccarello is clearly an heir of the era of Tom Ford at YSL, and Tom Ford had such a difficult time during his time there.
Yeah,
and he's now completely dedicated to making movies, but I think it'd be almost like a beautiful karmic,
Full circle.
moment to allow him to make, to produce one of those movies.
Is that directed by Wong Kar Wai?
No, Tom Ford as a director. I love Tom Ford as a film director.
Yeah.
He's only made 2 movies, but I think they were really
excellent.
They were excellent.
Yes, agreed.
The third person is David Lynch. I talk about Wong Kar Wai, Tom Ford, and David Lynch every day. But yeah, I think there would be something really beautiful in that. So not a woman.
I like that.
There's some great answers. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, there's another one that says, does it need more intellectual inspiration for a spectacular wow idea?
Yeah, this is kind of this about having more of an intellectual grounding. This is kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, which is what does this contextually say? It definitely says this is a sexy woman, but it says it very much in a one-dimensional, flat way, because there isn't any of that linking to outer culture. I don't think with what's going on in the world, freeing the nipple, which she's done 36 out of 48 looks, really does much. I don't think. I think that I do like it, but I just think even when I think about sexiness today, there's this kind of idea of concealment and reveal, and I think that there wasn't even any sort of styling plays in that, because there was one dress that had all this bunching, and they could have even bunched it so it was kind of a bit more hidden, but it just felt I completely respect that comment, which is that it doesn't. And also another thing that I thought was really interesting, because in the show notes they were talking about by making the clothes invisible, it kind of really puts more of an emphasis on what clothes are. It's kind of, I think in the show notes he was talking about how there's just so many clothes all the time, so I kind of wanted to make invert what they're meant to do, which is conceal a body and make them translucent.
Yeah.
But by doing that, I actually weirdly think it just puts the body more at the forefront as well. And I saw that there was a lot of comments, as there always is in these cases, which is the models are just looking really, really skinny, there's no diversity. And when there is, and this is a conversation that you could pretty much have for any single designer, to the extent that it's almost redundant, because they know we're having it. They obviously don't care that we're having it because nothing's changing. Yeah. But in this case, I do think it is interesting with so much conversation that is currently happening in this kind of age of Ozempic, that you have, I understand, said that by removing that statement of what a clothing item is meant to do, you've not actually highlighted the clothes, you've kind of also highlighted the body, because you can just see it, and you kind of are just seeing that same figure every time. And I think out of 48 looks, it's mad that not even one could have, showed the body in a different way. So I do think that, when you really do go into it in that state, it does feel a little bit vapid.
Yeah.
I think that last criticism you gave is really good. I'm surprised that they didn't cast someone like Lara Stone or even just a different type of model. And I think it's actually a real shame they didn't. But I think this is actually conceptually a very, very strong show. Yeah. I think maybe some of the references, I don't know. I think it's conceptually a very interesting show. It's a show about fetish. It's a show about And people always associate fetish with just latex and leather, but like this is like this different aspect of it. It's like this show about this bourgeois thing. As I was saying, I think the colors are just so interesting because they're a bit repulsive, but everything is like in this beautiful like silk thing, but it's those like beiges and like putrid greens. I think there's so many things happening there. It's a bit subtle and it doesn't hit you over the head. I think recently we've had such a big thing of like people need to shout out what their concepts and like their things are, otherwise it's not easily be translatable. But I think this is actually very, very conceptually strong. It's just kind of like subtle and a bit, it doesn't need to tell you. If you get it, that's great. But like, if not, they're just beautiful clothes. But I watched it and really made me think. I don't know. I think there's some really, like the ideas around fetish in this, I think, are fascinating. And I think sometimes when brands try to be too current and almost a bit too political, this is a luxury brand that's going to address 0.02% of the population. It can feel a bit trite to have like too much of a political climate. So maybe it's a commentary also on the fetish of buying expensive clothes that you can't actually wear.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because it's, you know, it's not even buying clothes that you can't even wear, it's buying, they're never going to be made, you can never buy them. And that's kind of, I remember reading an interview saying that's actually like the ultimate luxury, because I can't remember who it was talking about, but they put like a dress in a campaign and it was never even going to be available, and they were like, exactly, like that is the ultimate luxury, like desire that will never be fulfilled. And I think that I hear exactly what you're saying, like, you know, we have to understand what this brand is and what it represents in its long history, but I think the cynic in me is also just very aware that, you know, there is literally an exhibition all about sheer clothing that they've done that's on just down the road, and I do understand that there is a concept there, and I think it's really beautifully executed, but I think that the concept also ties into like this big commercial push that I can imagine a Sweezy is talking about, like, okay, what's the big code that we're going to reimagine for the modern age? Okay, this, how are we going to do it? We're going to have an exhibition, we're going to have this, great. And it is there, but I feel like that real cultural meat, or that thing that you can really like sink your teeth into, where you're like, yeah, I get it for now, maybe isn't totally there.
Amazing. No, thank you for that response. And I think it's really important also to sort of to think about where we sit critically, and that we sort of hold these very powerful and very confident sort of presentations, or the way that the house presents itself to account. So I think that's really important, and I think that's also always the purpose of our panels here. So thank you for that. And I'm watching it. I was looking at the models, and I just in awe at how brave they are, because it takes a lot. And just to remember, these are, you know, women going out there into this amazing space, wearing what they're wearing, and I just felt like give them a hug and saying, you know, really well done. You know, you did it.
I mean, in a way, I actually think it's beautiful. It's just like, I thought it's extremely elegant, it's sexy, but sexy nowadays, it's associated with like kind of a bit like, you know, you can be sexy but sort of borderline vulgar. And I think that for me, this show specifically, is just elegant and it's chic. Nevertheless, you know, you kind of want it, and then if you can buy it, great, but if you can't buy it, you kind of aspire to it, to look like that. And I think that that's what like a show is supposed to be doing, to make you dream. Whether you actually like click and buy, it's all irrelevant. It's actually, you look at these women and you're sort of like in awe, you know?
I mean, another thing, just sorry to interrupt there, another thing that I think we haven't mentioned Hedi Slimane today, just to come back to that for just one moment. I think what Hedi was really good at, and although he was at the house for a short time, I think from 2012 to 16, and then Anthony Vaccarello took over from them. I think it's interesting how Vaccarello built on that legacy again, and I think what always defines that success of Hedi's time was that he spoke to a younger audience. And we talked about, you know, is there an intellectual underpinning? Is it youthful? I didn't feel it, and I quite like that it doesn't speak to youth in the same way.
Exactly, yeah. And I totally agree. That's why he doesn't really entertain all the influencer and TikToker that all the other brands only care about. They're really interested in women of substance, women that they stand for something. And that's what I think the clothes in this collection really feel like, you know?
I think Anthony Vaccarello has spent most of his time trying to undo Like even bringing back the YSL logo, like everything was. I think
Yes.
aside from the campaigns that are still at times very similar, everything is more of an arcing back to Stefano Pilati and of course Tom Ford before, and of course Yves Saint Laurent. But like I think there's like, and maybe even a bit of Albert Baz that everyone always forgets was there for a couple of years.
That's right.
I think also this collection feels very timeless in the sense that I feel like it will be beautiful in 10 years.
Agreed.
And that's part of sedimenting once again the brand as this like outside of time, like the references are so clearly Yves Saint Laurent, they feel contemporary but they also feel kind of timeless. And it really is a checklist of references. And I feel like it harkens back to like, you know, some of the best YSL collections, some of the best Tom Ford for YSL. Like this looks like the autumn winter 2003, 2004 era shows. And I think it's about like making sure that this brand is seen outside of time. It doesn't need to be the most contemporary, you know, like in the moment brand, because it's a timeless brand that has been here since 1962 and will be there until 2062, you know?
And I
That's
love
what it's
all the
about.
jewelry. I feel like you can be like in Marrakesh and just like wearing nearly nothing and just wearing those incredible jewelry and bangles. It's all the jewelry is phenomenal. I just think that it's just, I have actually just like been looking at all the detailing of that because you can just imagine just lying by the pool in Marrakesh that's, you know,
Jewelry is
with Eve next to you.
There's one particular piece of jewelry which was a heart worn on the back.
Yes.
I don't know if we can get an image of that. We saw it during the run through.
Yeah, it might
not
be the
in
video
still
they put up
images.
on. So it was around the back.
I mean, look at these earrings, they're like phenomenal.
Incredible. Especially with the
Actually,
head wrap, you know, it's, the focus is really on the jewels.
And if he always does like, you know, different references of Saint Laurent, he also goes like cycles through the muses. Like there was like a time where like, everything was very like Betty Catrou and like, you know, like Catherine Deneuve is always there, but like this feels a bit more like Loulou de la Falaise, the jewelry designer for YSL, who used to wear this type of jewelry and those turbans. And I don't know, I think there's something really interesting about that.
Should we have one more question?
Do you think the Margiela show has had an impact on making shows more cinematic?
Okay. I think this show would have looked exactly the same, the
Yeah,
Margiela show.
yeah.
But I am not in any way doubting that the Margiela show has changed the history of the runway show this season.
I think,
Had an enormous impact. But what do you guys think?
I mean, I think,
You're the Margiela expert.
I just think, you know, Margiela, but it for me is actually Galliano that started this sort of like theatrical runway. But I don't think this season Margiela was something that crossed Anthony Vaccarello's mind at all for Saint Laurent. And yeah, like you said, I think that it would have looked like this regardless.
There are parallels, you know, like if you're gonna see like the sheer things, there's like this wet pavement look, but I think people have been doing theatrical shows for much longer than the last 3 months.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it's very poignant that we are ending on the spectacle of the show, and I think there is a renewed relevance of the runway show, if it is cinematic or if it is monumental, if it's spectacular, or if it's just simply a way of connecting to and bringing back a mythology around a house. And I think this show has been a really poignant example of this. So I just want to thank all the panelists and I think what you brought to the conversation was a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.